And so good morning to everyone. So we're gathered here for another event celebrating our 150 years of Poor Handmaid presence in America. So we welcome you, and we're very grateful for you taking the time out today to be with us. And we certainly hope that you enjoy the next hour with us. The topic of the panel today is partnering in the work of the Spirit through the ages. And so let's, for just a moment, take a look at that concept of partnering. What are we talking about? Well, it has many shades of meaning. We all know what it means to just that simple partnering of being in a card game with someone and hoping you win together. Or it could be that committed, lifelong partnering that we find in marriage. And there's a lot of levels of partnering in between. All the partnering on that big spectrum includes some kind of sharing, some kind of interchange, and some kind of benefit for both parties or both persons involved. Now, we Poor Handmaids have been using that tagline, partnering in the work of the Spirit, for a decade or two now. But actually, we've been acting out of that mode since the beginnings of our congregation. And so let's take a look as far back as partnering that we see personified in our foundress, Catherine Casper. This is going to be brought to light today by our panelists as they connect this aspect of her charism, partnering, with its continuance in the congregation for the next 167 years of the congregation's life. Now, Catherine's first partnering was definitely with the Spirit of God. She always described that as this voice within, something that prompted her, something she wanted to cooperate with. And these early promptings in her life called her attention to what's the next step? What am I called to? What's the next decision I need to make? And she always wanted that to be in alignment with what the Spirit was prompting her to, calling that the will of God. This was the grounding for her of all the further partnering that she did in her life. Mutuality is a large part of partnering. We know that mutuality acknowledges that each person or each group has a part of the truth, has a part of the wisdom, and a good deal of the goodness on both sides. And therefore, in partnering, both sides benefit by exchanging their wisdom, their truth, and their goodness. In the panel's researching and reflecting on Catherine's relationships and those of the women religious who continue her vision, they've discovered over and over again this trademark of mutuality in partnering, sometimes referred to as reciprocity. Partnership was evidenced in Catherine's mutual trusting relationship with Bishop Bloom. Now, we know that it was a necessary partnership at the beginning to establish the official movement of the congregation. But we also know that that evolved into a spiritual friendship that sustained both the bishop and her throughout her life and his life. Talk about mutuality. And she had a lot of mutuality with three men from her village who helped her early on when she was coming up with this idea of that little house, this little center that she could live and work out of. And so John Seary was her neighbor, and he's the one who drew up the blueprints and got the building permit. And then Christian Paulus, he came along and got the workforce and realized she wasn't going to pay them right away. And so he trusted her through that, though, and partnered with her in that. And then the mayor of the little village, John Leyendecker, he acted as her agent in getting a piece of property, a very small little piece of plot of land on which that little house could be built on. Now, we know she had no backing for her finances. Her pocket was empty. Her trust in providence was pretty full. So these men, they had to collaborate with her in the significant trust, I would say. But they gained something from that. She gained the things that we know, the land, the house, the work. But they saw her as an asset. she's going to bring about social welfare for this little village. She's going to be a spiritual guide to this village. And so they saw this as mutual, and they saw this as collaboration. And that's another significant characteristic of partnership, is collaboration. And that happens when two or more groups or people come together and they form something that isn't just 1 + 1. If you do this and I do this, that'll make this. It's always something greater than just this and this, because something new grows out of it. And it usually surprises people because at the beginning they only see it as a combination perhaps, but later the collaboration births a whole new thing. I'd like to mention here that I don't think Catherine always partnered just as a matter of need. Yes, that's in the picture. But she also would see in people the workings of the Spirit. She saw their gifts. She saw their abilities. And she knew that could be part of her vision also. She drew them in because she knew they could benefit from it as well as benefit her. And she was never troubled by allowing that goodness or those gifts or their generosity to overshadow hers. That did not matter to her. Of course, partnering is easily identifiable in her joint venture with the first 4 women who joined her. Now, they're not yet poor handmaids. They're just women of the village who feel called to her charism and her vision. And so they get together every Sunday or feast day, and they meet and dialogue and pray together and think about what ministry do we want to do the following week. Now, dialogue is another part of partnering. And it's when you begin to recognize and appreciate the truth of another and the vision of another. And in dialoguing about it, it kind of closes the space between persons. It's more than a conversation, because it usually comes from the heart and it touches something deep in one. So they did a lot of self-disclosure and understanding of what they wanted to do with their lives in their time with Catherine, and eventually became Poor Handmaids. Now we're going to turn to the partnering in Catherine's spirit that's continued right up to today. Our panel personifies that as we look at them. We see sisters and we see lay partners in the work of the Spirit. And each one is going to witness as she shares her understanding and her experience of the relationship of partnering, either through ministry or prayer or community. I'd like to introduce them. Sister Kathy Haas, you might give a little signal here, a Poor Handmaid for 47 years. She's a former member of provincial leadership and presently co-chair of the 150th Anniversary Committee. Susie Black, coordinator of services here at the Center at Donaldson. Susie has continued to use her gifts and abilities in partnering with us for 17 years. Sister Carol Langhauser, a Poor Handmaid for 44 years with a background in healthcare, ethics, and leadership. Sister Margaret Ann Haynes, she's presently a member of the provincial leadership team, a Poor Handmaid for 50 years, with a background in teaching and finance ministry. Jennifer Weinert, who is a leader of resident services here at the Maria Center. She's done this for 9 years and has partnered with Poor Handmaids in many other significant ways. Jeannie Boomershine, she's a 15-year member of the associate community. This community has over 140 individuals and in a partnering relationship with the Poor Handmaids, and we all cherish that relationship. So now these panelists are going to connect the partnering that was exemplified by Catherine with the continued partnering since Poor Handmaid arrival in the United States. And at the end of the presentation, they will reflect on how this partnering currently inspirits them in their prayer or in community life or ministry. I think you will enjoy it. And so we begin with Sister Kathy.
Thank you, Sister Linda. We've heard definitely we're going to be about partnering, and that's what Catherine did. She was situated in the Westerwald region of Germany, and she partnered with others both to ensure the ability of the sisters to serve the poor and needy and to ensure the survival of the Poor Handmaid congregation. She sought and trusted in others. An early example took place just 5 years after the congregation was founded, around 1856. Catherine had requested to the city of Wiesbaden for the rights needed to open 2 schools, but they denied her request several times. So she appealed. She went to the Duke of Nassau, Duke Adolphus, who overruled the local authorities, and the schools were opened. The Duke recognized the educational benefit for his people. And for Poor Handmaids, it meant being about education, which was really important to Catherine. So you can hear in that the mutual benefit that took place, and that's one of the hallmarks of partnering. While that situation in which the Duke helped Catherine was a concern, it did not seem like the threat that I alluded to. What was Catherine facing that she needed to safeguard the existence of the congregation? Well, to understand her actions, it helps to go back to the situation in Germany in the 1870s. In her letters, Catherine often talked about the difficulties and limitations that the congregation faced because of that political situation that was going on in Germany. Bismarck, the chancellor in 1871, was suspicious of Catholics' allegiance to the empire. His actions, along with anti-Catholic legislation, were intended to strengthen the power of the state over the church. So what was the result? Catholic schools and orphanages were closed. Yet nursing care by sisters was allowed because of the wars. Congregations could not accept new members. And there was that constant threat that the convents could be closed and properties confiscated. But many Catholics strongly resisted Bismarck, and they helped the church in a variety of ways. This time in German history, from approximately 1872 until 1887, became known as the Kulturkampf, or culture struggle. It was a time when the needs were great, and Catherine received all kinds of requests for help. She'd even sent sisters to America in 1868. However, the fact that new members could not be accepted meant meeting the needs was even more difficult. And in addition, her good friend, Bishop Bloom, was in exile, someone she would have normally confided in and couldn't do so as readily. So Catherine was dealing with a lot. It took a lot of prayer and discernment on her part. That's a characteristic of partnering in the Spirit. So Catherine was alert to the very real danger for the congregation. And just like a lot of other congregations in Germany at the time, she found reliable and trustworthy people to help her. To get around that law about not accepting new members, she established the novitiate in the Netherlands and also established missions in Bohemia and in England, which could serve as places of refuge if needed. Again, all with the help of faith-filled people. And she found people to take over the ownership of congregational properties in order to safeguard them from the state. It was commonly known this was for show and that the properties would be returned, yet you can imagine it required some trust. The Count of Spee in Dusseldorf helped out in this way, and her brother Joseph in 1875 purchased congregational property in Dernbach for the same reason. And later, the Count of Walderdorf at Molsberg, which is near Dernbach, took over that property and the responsibility for it. So you've heard earlier when Sister Linda spoke of Catherine entering into partnership with a lot of people. These are some examples again. She entered into partnership with these men and their families. She entrusted them with the care of the property and, in a larger sense, the future of the congregation. This stewardship was a great example of the trusting relationship in a partnership. It was a responsibility she was very conscientious about, and she trusted that the others were as well. And her trust in them proved well-founded, for they honored their commitments to her, and she honored hers to them. But partnerships are not without risk. Catherine and her brother, for example, were criticized. Catherine seen as showing favoritism, and her brother seen as, maybe his heirs would benefit. Yet they were exonerated when Joseph had the chance finally to turn over that property and the responsibility to the Count of Walderdorf you heard me speak about. In fact, he actually died without a legacy to give his heirs. But Joseph only wanted to be of service to the congregation, and you can hear he truly was. For Catherine, we can see collaboration and partnership were key to continuing the mission of the congregation and fulfilling that Spirit's urging her to serve and respond to the needs of the people. Well, so she needed sisters, and she needed some spiritual and financial base. Her collaboration and stewardship enabled the congregation to continue during a really chaotic time in Poor Handmaid history, and who knows where we would be today if she had not done that. And speaking of today, there are many examples of similar partnering today and over these past 150 years. One in particular stands out for me. After St. Joseph Hospital in Fort Wayne was sold, it was sold to another faith-based group. The St. Joseph Community Health Foundation was established in 1988. And just as Catherine entrusted others with stewarding property, the foundation board and staff were and continue to be entrusted with the responsibility of stewarding funds set aside from the sale of the hospital. These funds help continue the mission of the Poor Handmaids by contributing to the health and the well-being of the needy in Allen County through grants and community initiatives. One example, refugees from Burma were arriving in the Fort Wayne area, having fled their native land because of political oppression. I'm sure you've heard of that. In 2008, their numbers increased dramatically as thousands of refugees came. They needed help in all areas of their lives, getting established in a new country, many having grown up in the camps most of their lives, most not knowing English. So institutions and the agencies around were not really prepared for all the individuals and families and the needs that they came with. The foundation board struggled with how to respond because they're usually about giving grants. Much discernment and prayer, you've heard that before, went into their decisions, and they drew on the example of Catherine, gleaning from her life, her trust in the Spirit, and how she made decisions and how she might have responded. The foundation served as a help in gathering Catholic Charities, Health Visions Fort Wayne, city and county, and other agencies to assess what were the needs of the refugees and could they meet them. You can imagine the challenges, including getting the local community on board. Collaboration and mutuality were key. So just as Catherine partnered with faith-filled people in her day, faith-filled people of the Fort Wayne area stepped up and came together to care for the refugees, as they have done over the years for so many others in our history in Fort Wayne. And just as Catherine entrusted the congregation's resources to faith-filled and trustworthy partners in her day, the Poor Handmaids entrust resources to the foundation board and staff, who in turn entrust resources and support to many agencies and groups, continuing the mission by partnering with the Poor Handmaids. And for that, we are grateful. And so now let us hear more about partnering from Susie.
Thank you, Sister Kathy. I was given 4 books to read to get the background here on more information, and then they limit me to 7 minutes, which just doesn't seem fair. But I would tell you that when I read through those books, the information that I gathered about Catherine's leadership style and the way she partnered and the way she interacted with everyone that she came in contact with is not so different as what we do today. I went through my mind that we have seminars, we have books, we have information about leadership, and these will resonate with everybody in this room. She was described in every book I read this way. She was described. She listened. She observed. She was fair and impartial. She empowered others. She was transparent. She sought the counsel of others. She accepted help from others. She delegated easily. She accepted responsibility and stood accountable for her own decisions. She was a creative thinker and a problem solver. She was always keeping in mind the dignity of others and showed respect for everyone. And at the end of the day, and through everything she did, she stayed focused on the glory of God with her own openness to the Spirit and how the Spirit worked within her, the voice within, as Sister Linda mentioned earlier. And as we talk today, you'll pick up all of those qualities in everything and every story we tell. The stories I chose today from what I read, I think there are three that I want to share. One of the things that the day did was they did letter writing. Sister Kathy alluded to that. So most of her communication, of course, was either straight on, face-to-face verbal or letter writing. And those letters tell a lot about how Catherine worked as a leader. She often wrote we and as one and as a group. She looked at the whole. She looked at how her counselors advised. Many of her letters started by being addressing to the counselors for their advice, to think what they might, encourage them to say what they might think. She had a situation where everyone here is familiar with what we call the glass ceiling for women in today's world, 2018. Equal pay, equal power, that type of thing. Not so much different for Catherine. Catherine had you've heard about Bishop Bloom, who had a long relationship as a friend to Catherine. There was also another person that was involved in kind of the power of how the congregation was structured and how the congregation moved forward, and his name was Father Whittower. And he struggled greatly with relinquishing power over being in charge of or the superior of the congregation. Bishop Bloom often found himself sort of caught in the middle of that struggle and had great respect for Catherine. And Catherine, in her own determined but very systematic manner, stayed the course and was going to go ahead and lead the congregation to the very best of her ability. But it was no different than it is today. There was this constant ebb and flow of what Father Whittower was interested in. And then one of the excerpts I read, he took exception with the fact that Catherine was never in her office. She was always out and about. And he said she was absolutistic. And when in fact that wasn't the case at all. She walked among the people of the congregation. She went out into the community. She went to the various missions. She was about trying to find out what the needs were, what the culture was, what the situations were at the time, and how to approach affecting change, a positive change. Ultimately, Bishop Bloom was able to see that, as were others, and to understand that she was not being absolutistic and in charge. She was actually gathering information and gathering ideas and thoughts from others. So that was kind of a first inkling as I read through this of where that power struggle was headed. Ultimately, another story that kind of underlies that, the congregation had teachers and they had nurses or people in health that were going to do health care. And Father Whittier thought that the ones that were learning nursing or learning the healthcare aspects needed to be divided out from the rest of the congregation and sent elsewhere to study and to be housed, etc. And Catherine felt very strongly they needed to all stay together. They were a congregation. They were a community. They needed to stay together. But in true Catherine form, she went to her counselors her counselors, took the advice of other people, talked to many people about it. And her counselors were somewhat divided. Some of them thought, yeah, this is probably a good idea. Some of them not so much. And it came down to she had to make the courageous decision on her own based on the information she had, on her prayer and discernment, and on how she really truly felt that they needed to move forward. And she made the decision to keep them together. And she was willing to stand accountable for that. If it was a bad decision, she was willing to go there. It was true to her character of how she went about leadership and how she partnered with others. She did talk to various people. She did take it all into consideration. And as this continued, between the three of them, this sort of partnering, power struggling, partnering some more, a decision was made. And the decision came from Pope Pius IX on March of 1860. See there, I put a date in because I didn't have any dates the first time, you guys. So in 1860. And Pope Pius sent in to the congregation that she would be the general superior. It would not be Father Whittower in charge of the congregation. It would be Catherine, and that Catherine had that role. So you talk about breaking through the glass ceiling. 1860 was a long time ago to do that, and she did it, and she did it in a way that had perfect support from the Vatican. And that spoke to her character. That spoke to how she partnered and how she worked with others. And it was evident that she did it and did it well. I was very taken as I read through the various stories about how you could change the names and put people in that we work with on a daily basis or live with on a daily basis and partner with on a daily basis here in the ministry center on these grounds. And it's not a lot different. It's how do you come to those decisions? How do you collaborate? How can you be transparent? She had no hidden agendas. She was honest about her thoughts, her ideas. She took them to many people to get that background. And I would highly recommend anybody in this room who wants to read one of these books, find Sister Linda and get one, because it's very interesting to see how she goes about it. And in her letter writing, she often starts every letter with naming that we're doing this in the glory of God, and she sends it to her counselors, and she includes people. The other thing that I thought showed clearly with all of the communication, how open she was in the partnering, even with Father Whittower, who was contentious with her, she often asked her counselors to write their thoughts to him as well, to him and to Bishop Bloom, so that their words were being heard in their own way by these people that maybe weren't agreeing with her. So her willingness to stay openness to the Spirit and have everything she did be empowering to others, just I found very dynamic and very moving personally. And I think it definitely is a juxtaposition to what we do here at the Ministry Center daily. So with that, I'm going to let Sister Carol take over.
Collaboration and partnership is easily seen in the life of Catherine, and it was instilled in the members who followed her. She found partners in building and in financial endeavors. She never felt that anything that she did was of her own doing. She felt inspired by the voice within, and that voice guided her in her decisions and how she and her companions were to set out to help those in need. From the very beginning, Catherine consulted Bishop Bloom and sought the assistance of the people she met throughout the Westerwald in Germany. As Catherine continued to talk to Bishop Bloom about the voice within and her desire to begin a religious community, the bishop did not want to be an obstacle to the will of God for Catherine by refusing permission, but he also did not want to offer any financial support. He thought that if the peasant girl could build and pay for a little house, then truly the voice within was the voice of God. Many of us know the story of Catherine beginning the first little house with about $1.50 in her pocket. She found people who believed in her vision and who believed in her. She engaged the help of John Seary. He had some skills as a contractor, but mostly he was a farmer. But John offered his services free of charge, drawing up the plans, overseeing the work of the building, and hiring craftsmen who were needed. John thought that the house was for Catherine and her mother. Catherine did not want to disillusion him, so years later she wrote, "I could not say straight out that I had nothing to begin with. Otherwise, John and Christian Paulus, who was also a financial help to her, would not have supported me, and the workmen would not have had the courage to begin the work." Catherine enlisted the assistance of John Leyendecker, also the mayor of Dernbach, to purchase a plot of land that belonged to the city. The records merely state that the mayor acted as her agent, and there is no mention of a price or how it was paid. But most probably it was not a cash deal. Those beginnings show Catherine collaborating with those who could help her realize her goal and to begin building the little house. An early ministry of home nursing began, and Catherine's maids went out to care for the sick in their home. Catherine wanted the members to be well trained for their profession, and so she enlisted the help of Dr. Thewald, a medical officer for Montabaur, who came twice a week to teach the sisters how to dress wounds, treat the sick, and take care of them. He was paid annually, but also had the obligation to take care of those who were sick in the convent and the community. When those first 8 sisters came to Hessen Castle here near Fort Wayne, the sisters began nursing the people in their home before they could organize the school. Bishop Lours bought an abandoned hotel in Fort Wayne and asked the sisters to start a hospital in Fort Wayne, for there was none. The bishop offered the building to the Sister Rose on the condition that the sisters would start a hospital. An added incentive was that there was ample space to provide for a mother house for the sisters. So 8 months after the sisters arrived in Hessen Castle, 3 started St. Joseph Hospital. The sisters also provided home nursing, and the story is told that when a sister returned after a full night of night duty in someone's home, she came to go to bed and found that there was a patient in her bed. So she had to find somewhere else to sleep. Soon the sisters were able to buy the hospital from the bishop, but they raised funds through raffles. Does that sound familiar yet today? Raffles, yes. In the early 1900s, the city of Mishawaka was doubling in population. Since October of 1878, the sisters were living in a home provided by Mrs. Agnes Phillips, who was cared for by the sisters. This house became known as St. Joseph Convent. St. Agnes Convent. As a result of the home nursing program that was run by the Poor Handmaids, they were approached by the physicians of the Physicians Guild to start a hospital in 1906. The physicians felt that it was a great inconvenience and a danger to send patients to the South Bend hospitals all the way from Mishawaka. Father Louis Mensch, the pastor of St. Joseph Parish, got the project moving. The public provided the money, about $8,000, to build a separate building from the convent to serve as a hospital. When the hospital finally opened in 1910, the first patient was sitting on the front steps. This partnership between the sisters, the citizens, and the physicians all came together to achieve the hospital for Mishawaka. Again, negotiations between the Poor Handmaids and the Manufacturer Association East Chicago began in 1917. Finally, a third attempt succeeded in 1926. Fundraising was spearheaded by Colonel Walter Riley and Mr. Thompson from Inland Steel. The ground where the hospital stands was donated by Inland Steel. The hospital finally opened in 1928 and was named St. Catherine Hospital in honor of Colonel Riley's mother, Catherine, and was placed under the patronage of St. Catherine of Alexandria. Throughout the histories of the Poor Handmaid Ministries, they were begun with the help of people in the local area. Long-term relationships grew from these partnerships over the years because people believed in the work of the Poor Handmaids and they wanted to join in their ministries. Today, the Poor Handmaid Ministries are supported by 4 operating principles: sustainability, transformational innovation, scale, and disciplined collaboration. This collaboration is defined as partnerships that answer a critical societal need. And so, as it has been throughout the ages, collaboration is fundamental throughout various ministries of the Poor Handmaids. And so I'm going to hand it over to Margaret Ann.
Thank you, Carol. Sister Carol mentioned how Catherine and her maids were nursing the sick in their homes, in their little houses. During the years between 1861 and 1871, Catherine showed how she could adapt her idea of service to the needy. There was a lack of women nurses during this time, so when the 7 Weeks' War broke out between Austria and Prussia in 1866, Catherine received urgent appeals from the government, whom she had struggled with in keeping her sisters and her property. She was asked to nurse the wounded sisters in the field and military hospitals. Father Maher writes, Catherine answered the call purely for the love of God in the person of the wounded. So despite terrible conditions in these field and military hospitals, sisters from the Mother House, several convents in Dernbach, and other sisters in Dusseldorf, Germany, were asked to tend the wounded in several field and military hospitals. Because of the shortage of military hospitals, several little houses, as the convents were known, were turned into military hospitals. As many as 30 wounded soldiers were cared for in the convents. Catherine again received a second request for sister nurses after the Franco-Prussian War broke out in 1870. That's the war between France and Prussia. To help prepare them for the poor conditions that they would find themselves in, Catherine called a group of sisters in for a retreat. After the retreat, the sisters then went to the places assigned to them by the military authorities, not Catherine, who handled the placement of all religious nurses. After a second request during this same war, Catherine writes a letter to all the sisters saying, every mission must offer its quota, for there were no sisters available at the Mother House. She goes on to say, it would please us if any of the missions could take wounded soldiers into their homes. To make the sisters available, she said, nursing the sick in private homes for the present must be discontinued. She ended by saying, let every sister live true to the spirit of her vocation, serving the wounded cheerfully as a sacrifice in the name of Jesus. Catherine could not say no to helping the wounded. Catherine's example of sending sisters to the front lines was also followed by the German PHJC leadership during First World War. Again, the German government asked all religious congregations to send nurses to field hospitals and turn their convents into military hospitals. So for the years 1914 to 1918, PHJC sisters nursed the wounded in field and military hospitals and in their convents all across the country. Today, our ministries work with government agencies to serve the needy in the areas where they are located. The partnering is not as drastic as in the times of Catherine. Today, the ministries seek a partnership with rather than it being demanded by government agencies. Today, the partnering deals with wellness, with health improvement, and health access. Also, lay men and women work side by side with the sisters. An example of this is Health Visions Midwest. Since I've recently ministered at Health Visions, I will most likely say we. So Health Visions' tagline is, "Create healthy communities by empowering people to live a healthy life." To carry out this vision, we developed 3 coalitions: the Allen County Health Disparity Coalition, the East Side Senior Collaborative, and the Bridges to Wellness Network. Through these coalitions, we encouraged over 120 state and local agencies to work together to combat health disparities. Health Visions has worked with the Center for Disease Control, the Indiana and Illinois State Departments of Health, and local health departments for many years. Through partnerships with these organizations, we were able to accomplish the following: provide education on lead poisoning and lead testing of children in Allen County, procure a grant for the Maternal Child Health Title V program in Northwest Indiana, promote the certification of community health workers, and develop a state certified curriculum to train community health workers. We had a seat on the State Board of Covering Kids and Families, which works to enroll uninsured children in Indiana into a health insurance program. We hosted the quarterly meetings and encouraged vendors like Anthem and MDWise to work together and not compete. Not only does Health Visions try to collaborate, we encourage agencies to collaborate with each other. We received a 5-year grant from the Center for Disease Control to provide health services to pregnant Hispanic women in Lake County. We supplement the transportation infrastructure in East St. Louis by transporting seniors to doctor appointments, grocery shopping, and many other needs. We work with senior housing managers to allow a community health worker to set up self-monitoring stations and teach the residents how to track their weight and blood pressure. And we partner with the Indiana Minority Health Coalition to provide diabetes self-management programs. These are just a few examples of how our ministries partner with government agencies to improve the health of our civic communities. Many more stories can be told about our other ministries, such as Nazareth House, Nazareth Home, and Sojourner Truth House. And now I turn it over to Jennifer.
Good morning. I want to share with you today how the Catherine Casper Life Center partners with the Poor Handmaids through the same vision as their foundress had for the Little House, which was a place, as we heard, for charitable works in Dernbach, Germany. I want you to realize how all of you here are part of that partnership with the Catherine Casper Life Center. Catherine Casper sought partnerships, as we heard Sister referred to when she talked a little bit about the Little House, in response to God's call, what she referred to as the voice within. In the publication, Inspired by the Love of God, by PHJC Sister Gottfriedis, and this is the publication, she reflected on Catherine's vision for the Little House. The Little House was completed in 1848 with the help and service of like-minded companions. She wrote, "Catherine cared for her neighbor. She recognized all as a brother and sister in Christ. She wanted God's care to be visible to them by the way the care was given to them." CKLC's vision reflects this. Their vision states, "Inspired by the presence of God and God's care for all, residents and co-workers form a community in which all persons are equally listened to, cared for, and appreciated, as well as respected." According to the research of John Maher, and he also wrote a book entitled With Attentive Ear and Courageous Heart, The first residents of the little house were Catherine, who was 28 years old at the time, and Ann Gillis, an orphan patient who unfortunately died just 6 weeks after. Still struggling to pay off construction debt, working a job, Catherine visited with the sick in their homes on her days off. Catherine welcomed a widow, Mrs. Gertz, and 3 of the children she cared for as a tenant into that home to help her. But just 2 years later, the little house, which was originally 32 feet and by 19 feet, with whitewashed walls and meager furnishings, needed an addition because their ministry had grown and they now needed to shelter over 38 people. The residents consisted of orphan children, adults, both the aged, widows, and caretakers, and novices of the newly formed PHJC congregation. Today, likewise, the Catherine Casper Life Center is home to adults at various stages of their life journey. They're living in community simply with dignity and respect, being open to the Spirit, and of course partnering along with the PHJC sisters, Ancilla students, and the co-workers. Partnerships were very evident in the little house. The young novices devoted their days to being a nurse, a handmaid, mother, farmer, bricklayer, and day laborer. Widow Gertz, who I mentioned earlier, cared not only for her children, but also for those orphans in that home. Mr. and Mrs. Kirch were a wealthy couple, and they were inspired by Catherine's ministry and the new congregation. So they had chosen to give several $100s to the early sisters' mission, and later their property in exchange for room, board, and care at the little house. Mrs. Manns was another resident, and Jeannie will talk a little bit more about her in a second. She gave what she had in exchange for provisions and contributed to the work of the little house for over 50 years. Together, all those people formed something greater in collaboration. At the Catherine Casper Life Center, I witnessed these collaborative partnerships almost daily between the residents, the sisters, students, and all of the co-workers. In mutuality, I believe we acknowledge each person has something to offer. It is through this continued giving and receiving between each other that we can flourish and grow in partnership of reciprocity, as the early PHJC Little House did. As an intergenerational community, we continue to form friendships and bonds by exchanging our stories and our wisdom, our experiences. We share our meals together. We learn alongside each other. We minister through communion, prayer, dialogue, and services that we provide, even at a dear one's bedside. We grow in understanding by acting together for social justice, participating in the recycling program, and care for our earth. It is with each activity, each conversation, each hand you hold, each smile you share, each idea you initiate together, the talents you resource to us, and person recognized for who they are, that we partner together in the Spirit. Father Whittower, chaplain, witnessed the same in Catherine's work. He wrote, "She visited the sick in her hometown, showed them small signs of love, comforted and taught them how they should regard their sickness. As far as the situation for her own family permitted, she would also stay with them, care for them, do chores in their home, and night watches at the bedsides of the patients." As Sister Linda alluded to earlier in her introduction, it was not enough for Catherine to care for just the bodily needs of the sick. She saw the whole person, and therefore she tried to minister to not only their spirits, but their souls as well. I feel the same way as I partner with the Poor Handmaids in my role as Resident Services Coordinator. Through this partnership, I have been blessed with friendship, love, understanding, and faith, and I hope that each of you recognize the ways that you bless the Poor Handmaids and that you are blessed too. So brothers and sisters, and all of my partners in the Spirit, it is through the understanding of who we are partnering with, why we partner, and the ways in which we partner, that we can feel encouraged and enlivened in the work that we do, the lives we live, and remain faithful to that voice within. Jeannie?
Thank you, Jennifer. Our associate program, as it was called here in America, at the time it officially began 35 years ago in 1983, was basically made up of family and friends of the sisters that had close contact with the sisters and wanted to imitate their ways. This description was not that far removed from the first members of Catherine's pious society called the Association of Charity. This was the lay charitable society that Catherine organized before the Poor Handmaids were to be. Amongst those women were, as Jennifer mentioned, Widow Gerse. She was about 6 years Catherine's senior, mother of 2 children and 1 foster child. She became acquainted with Catherine and her spirituality by taking part in a group that Catherine formed when she was 22 that met on Sundays and holy days of obligation to pray the rosary and encourage each other to live a more perfect life. Their one common effort was charity for their neighbor. She cared for not only her children, but the other children as well when she lived in the little house. And Mrs. Mann moved into the little house in 1850, giving Catherine what little money she had so that she could enjoy blessings and security to help in any way. And as Jennifer mentioned, she remained there for almost a half a century, helping with the orphans. I believe that she felt called to this as Widow Gerse, after being observing and understanding the meaning of caring for the needy like Catherine. The needy were not those that were in financial distress. They were the sick or the children without anyone to care for them. People with hardships that needed to be comforted in some way with services of love, the love of Christ that Catherine imitated. The ladies just mentioned had been married, but still wanted to partner with the Spirit and saw the Spirit so clearly in Catherine and her ways. They took care of and nurtured their children and orphans as we, associates, do, our children and grandchildren, caring for them physically and nurturing and encouraging them spiritually. Before I knew of the associates, I experienced the blessing of getting to know Dolores Schaefer. She became an associate in 1989. I met her in 1998. Because I wanted to return to the Catholic Church after being away for 25 years and wanted to update myself on Catholicism. Dolores was the leader of RCIA at St. Michael's at the time. When I introduced myself, she was very kindly. She just was very sweet and kind to me and took me under her wing that very first night and showed me a seat near her. When I needed it the most, she made me feel loved and accepted immediately. And she didn't even know that I had recently been divorced and a very broken person. I did not know at the time that she had any connection to the Poor Handmaids, but I should have recognized that connection because the Ancilla Chapel and the grounds here were at that very time becoming my peaceful place. And I felt that same warmth and mutual respect from the sisters. When my friend Barb invited me to become an associate in 2002, because she thought the Spirit was moving within me and something about Catherine's charism, I wasn't so sure of all that at the time, but I decided to see what she was talking about and knew I was in the right place the first session of my formation when I became aware that none other than my mentor, Dolores Schaefer, was the leader of the sessions. Dolores was truly steeped in Catherine's spirit, and she taught me so very much, more than she'll ever know. When she was no longer able to carry on as our regional associate leader because of her health, I offered to follow in her footsteps as well as Catherine's, if I could have as my co-leader Barb Lowry. She's the one that actually invited me into the associate community. So the story between the mentoring of Dolores to me and her knowledge of knowing that I got it as far as Catherine and the spirit within, so that I wanted to carry on for her, was an example of reciprocity. Reciprocity exists when the giving and receiving between two persons results in growth and benefit for both involved. This is another trademark of partnering. One more example of reciprocity that I currently have the opportunity in sharing in. Before I proclaim the readings at 11:15 Mass at the Casper home on Thursday mornings, I spend time reading the daily readings and reflections to Sister Mary there at CKH, because Sister Mary can no longer read the print. She has told me numerous times that she looks forward to my reading to her and then to hear it again at Mass. She likes it when I read loud, clearly, and slowly, and reminds me when I skip any one of those specific qualifications. She keeps me in line, and it ends up helping all those that are out there listening that day, as well as Sister Mary. I'm very thankful to have this opportunity to be part of the panel today. In research and preparation and some words of wisdom from Sister Linda and Sister Joan, it has really got me to realize as a reality that regardless if the American sisters were declining in number or not, more than ever, we need our associates, fiat spiritus, co-workers, and friends to carry out Catherine's charism. We can do that in ways that only we can, living the lives that we do in this world, a life different than religious. I can hear Catherine say, "Nothing from the strength of our own deeds, but all with the grace of God." I pray that we continue to spread those ripples of love and that we may absorb the Holy Spirit's words and guidance and put them into action like Catherine. Let's do partner with the work of the Spirit.
And so Jeannie has just shared with us how she's been touched by just the fact that she could bring together in her mind and heart what it means to her to partner with the Poor Handmaids and we with her. And so I invite the other the panelists, if you have anything you'd like to say about what this time has meant for you and how it's encouraged you or enlightened you, just give a little thought there.
As I read the material about the little house that I was provided, I thought about those meager beginnings and how challenging it must have been at that time. And I think about myself here, and maybe perhaps that there's days when you're elevated, but then sometimes there's days that are a little bit more challenging than others. And that's why I'd like to read to you one more time how I feel how important it is that we understand who we're partnering with, that we understand the Poor Handmaids and their history. And I hope that this panel was able to provide you with some of that information, and that you understand, and we each try to understand why we partner together, and think about the ways in which we partner, because all of us are a part of that. And then again, this, I feel, makes me feel more encouraged and enlivened in the services and work and partnerships that I'm able to be part of. It does encourage me in my life, and then each of us has that voice within that we can tap into for that encouragement.
As a Poor Handmaid, we know these stories somewhat. And yet, I think I learned more and more in just being given this gift of doing some more research. But for me, the gift has been being part of this panel and to hear each of us and our stories, and how each of us have been touched by that wonderful woman that we call Mother Mary or Catherine Casper. And it's deepened her life in me. And so I appreciate that.
I'm touched by the openness of the spirit and of all these women saying yes to doing the panel, and how all of us are open to the spirit. We wouldn't have what we have here at the Center of Donaldson. The Poor Handmaids wouldn't have our legacy that we have of the 150 years here in the United States without the openness of all those that we've cared for and worked with, and who have walked with us all these 150 years. And so that was, especially as I listened to the talks again today, is the openness that everyone had in bringing Catherine's story back to us.
I guess for me, sharing a personal, my personal feeling about how Catherine has worked in my life, much like everybody, we all have our own story. We all have our own story outside of here. And I came here after it was evident that my marriage of many years was going to fail. And I had to start over, and I had my own business for 31 years, but I needed more. I needed a regular income. I needed the ability to get insurance. I needed things, much like the people that were in Catherine's missions and in places that Catherine was helping. And it might not surprise anybody here, I interviewed 3 times before I actually landed a job. But I did, and I was the assistant to the director. And it's not lost on me as I read these books and as I listen to the panel and as I hear the stories, how Catherine's charism touched my life. And I used a story today where Catherine made a decision after listening to her counselors, and there was a split decision among the counselors on what to do. And Catherine made a decision on her own and stood by that decision. After I'd been here a couple of years, the director left, and I applied for the job. I needed to be able to make that transition in my life, to be able to keep my home. I still had 1 child at home in high school, 1 in college. I didn't mind the idea of downsizing, but I wanted to hang on to their home for a little bit. And it was going to make a difference in my life if I could get the director's position. Sister Jolise was the provincial leader at the time, and she had a split decision among the counselors that she talked to about whether to give it a try to let me be the director or not. And like Catherine, she went through some prayer and discernment and made the decision to move forward with letting me be the director on a temporary basis for 6 months. And then we were going to decide at the end of 6 months if we thought it was a good fit or not. And with it came a little bit of an increase for my salary for that period of time, which was very helpful with a child in college and being a single mother. And then as it turned out, of course, we felt like it was a good fit, and I stayed. It's not lost on me that her courage to make that decision, because my only work background was I'd worked for myself for 31 years and had my own business. So there wasn't anybody to call to say, is she really going to be able to do this? Sure, yeah, I can. That was a risk on her part, but she did it. I could go on for a long time about the amount of things that have touched my life in working here. Sister Linda Volk is my friend, my mentor, my touchstone when I am challenged. She has been so pivotal in my life. She has made my last 17 years amazing. And I'm so thankful to be able to experience Catherine's charisma through Linda. And I just felt like I needed to share that. And I don't think my story is so much different than just about everybody in this room. I think everybody could tell those stories. So I'm just blessed to be here and glad to be partnering in the Spirit.
One more quick one. Thank you, Susie. We pray regularly for our benefactors, and when I was preparing for this, I realized kind of how widespread that is, how far back that goes. But when we say that, it's everyone who partners with us. So that's you all, it's us all. You know, our coworkers, our friends, our families, not just here, but beyond, residents. And so, but what struck me was that Catherine promised the Count of Walderdorf and his family that they'd be in our prayers for their life. I'm sure she did that for the other people that helped her and walked with her. And it reminded me that not to take that so lightly, not that I do, but you know, sometimes you go, yeah, okay, everybody who's helping us. Just the chance that in 2013 we went to a general chapter and there were sisters from many different countries gathered, and we had the chance to go to that castle of that count and join in a very special mass and some time with the family, both informally and had a little reception. But what it emphasized for me was the depth of that relationship and that commitment. You know, here I was reading about it, but you know, then I thought back to that, and I think we really were able to honor each other's commitments. And so I think that power of prayer and walking with each other maybe is stronger than we sometimes realize, but grateful for that.
Weren't they a marvelous panel? And we thank them so much. Thank you very much. And we thank you. Thank you for being with us for this lengthy amount of time. There wasn't a word wasted, and so we appreciate it, and we hope that it's meant something to you. Thank you so much for being with us.